Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The title of today's session is Near It Retreated, Far It Called Him Still. Near it retreated, far it called him still. It here refers to the divine. And this is a common experience on the spiritual path that sometimes quite early on this journey, one feels that one has experienced the divine and one finds it so near me. And then suddenly you find that it becomes distant. One finds that sometimes the fault lies with us. We get into that euphoria and then forget how we got there and what is expected of us. And we feel that all this sadhana of years has been wiped out in one stroke through these mistakes of mine, and the divine has retreated. And this keeps happening. That's what we call the days and nights of yoga. Days when you feel the divine is very near you, and night when it retreats. And while that is true, what is also true is far it called him still. Even when the divine seems to be far away and remote from us, it still holds a great attraction. It beckons us, and we are ready to begin the journey again and again if necessary, and are ready to continue with it for thousands of lives if required. So both are true. Near it retreated, far it called him still. This line occurs in Savitri in Book 3, Canto 1. It is the 28th line of this canto, and in my edition of Savitri it occurs on page 305. Just to put it in the context, this is a part of Ashwapati's yoga. Now Ashwapati was a king, and as in the Savitri in Mahabharata, Ashwati goes into an intense sadhana. But there is a difference. In Mahabharata, Ashwapati goes into that intense sadhana to get a child. And he is blessed with Savitri. Here in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, Ashwapati goes into this intense sadhana so that he can bring down on this earth that power of the divine which will be able to transform the earth. The earth has been a place of sorrow and suffering for very long, so long that it is considered axiomatic that that is what this world has been designed to be. And therefore, this is something which is a rather utopian dream which Ashwapati has. But then he is very sure that just because the earth has been a place of sorrow and suffering for thousands of years, it doesn't mean that it will necessarily be so. So he goes on this intense sadhana, and Ashwapati's yoga in Savitri, in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, forms about 1/3 of the scripture, 1/3 of Savitri. So it's a pretty long section. And this book 3, in fact, is the last book in which we have Ashwapati's yoga. From book 4 onwards, we have the rest of the story continuing. So you can see that it is now towards the end. And while in book 1, we have the beginning of the yoga and the secret knowledge which Ashwapati realizes as a result of his sadhana, book 2, which is a rather long book, we have the unique spiritual experiences of Ashwapati. Read Sri Aurobindo's experiences, in which he talks about the different worlds through which he has traveled. Now these are the worlds other than this one, and we find that some of those worlds are somewhat similar to Earth, some of them are much better, some of them much worse, and it corresponds to what we generally call heaven and hell, and many types of worlds in between. So he has experienced all this. And after experiencing all this comes this book 3, Canto 1. And the title of this canto is The Pursuit of the Unknowable. Now, the unknowable here refers to the divine, but then who is writing about it? Who is given this title, The Pursuit of the Unknowable? The one who has known him. The one who has known him already in book 2 has realized him. But yet, it forms a sort of an introduction to the next phase of Ashwapati's yoga. And the introduction is titled The Pursuit of the Unknowable. And therefore, one does not find in this in the type of approach which a novice, a beginner might have. You do not have those shuffling steps, that groping in the dark which a beginner might have. And the experience in this canto, The Pursuit of the Unknowable, is not sort of littered with all types of stumbles and falls through which the sadhak rises and then starts off again. Here is a yogi who has realized the secret knowledge already in book 1, talked in detail about many of his experiences in book 2 while traveling through different worlds, and here now he is at the last stage of his yoga when he is not satisfied with his personal realization but wants that his realization should enable him to bring down on earth that power which will transform the earth, which will transform worldly life, which will transform human beings into a higher version of themselves, into much better creatures who will express much more of their divinity than they normally do. So it is at that stage that we come to book 3. So this is actually an introduction to this next stage of Ashwapati's yoga, where he now enters that phase when he will go beyond his personal realization and plead with the Divine Mother for acceding to his request to bring down on earth that higher force, that consciousness which has kept away from the earth so far, make that consciousness descend on earth so that human life on earth and worldly life can be transformed. And therefore, because this is a canto which has been written by a very accomplished yogi who has already reached that stage of realization, we find that there are many passages which are actually a description of the divine. The divine itself has been described. So in that sense, we can say that these are Upanishadic verses in the English language. Upanishads are a description of the divine as experienced by the rishis, and that is the type of a few descriptions of that type. And I'll share with you the ecstasy that those passages which have that mantric quality, I'll share with you as we go along. So with this background, let's now turn to the first page of this canto, book 3, canto 1. I'll start from the very beginning of this canto. All is too little that the world can give. Its power and knowledge are the gifts of time and cannot fill the spirit's sacred thirst. Although of one these forms of greatness are, and by the breath of grace our own lives abide, although more near to us than nearness's self, it is some utter truth of what we are, hidden by its own works, it seems far off, impenetrable, occult, voiceless, obscure. The presence was lost by which all things have charm, the glory lacked of which they are dim signs, the world lived on made empty of its cause, like love when the beloved's face is gone. Now here you find that the seeker is highly motivated to pursue the divine because he finds that the world is not really very charming. It doesn't have that type of glory, that type of happiness which the seeker expects, and therefore he wants to experience the divine, which he knows is there in everything in this creation. So let's go over it a little slowly. All is too little that the world can give. Everything that the world as we see it can give is very little. Its power and knowledge are the gifts of time and cannot fill the spirit's sacred thirst. So whatever we get here, be it in the form of power, be it in the form of knowledge, these are the gifts of time. Time itself is something which is passing, and therefore this is another way of saying that all the power and knowledge that we get here is temporary. These are just gifts of time given to us to sort of keep us amused, to keep us entertained as we pass through this life. And since they are very little, the world can give very little to us in real terms. They cannot fill this knowledge and power, cannot fill the Spirit's sacred thirst. So this thirst, this aspiration for the divine is something which is unique to human beings. And as Sri Aurobindo says in the very first page in the Life Divine, this is one aspiration that has persisted in man ever since times immemorial and has survived every attempt at banishment. Even when one has tried at individual level or at the level of a society to somehow ignore it, to banish it, to drive it out of one's life, that attempt has never succeeded. This is one aspiration that has continued without any interruption throughout history. So it is this sacred thirst that he's talking about in these 3 lines. And why is that sacred thirst there? Because sooner or later, man realizes that all what one get in this world is very little. All is too little that the world can give. Its power and knowledge are the gifts of time and cannot fill the Spirit's sacred thirst. Although one these forms of greatness are, and by its breath of grace our lives abide, although more near to us than nearness is self, it is some other utter truth of what we are. Now, the littleness of what is there in the world occurs in spite of all this. All this means in spite of all this in the world being a manifestation of the divine itself. Although of one these forms of greatness are, and by its breath of grace our lives abide. Although of one with a capital O, the one, the divine. Although of one means in spite of that one, which is the one which is behind all these forms, although of one these forms of greatness are, all these forms of greatness in the world, all this manifestation, these are different forms of the one. And by its breath of grace our lives abide. Our very life depends upon, our very breath depends upon the breath of grace of the one. Although more near to us than nearness is self. And if we are manifestations of that, if all creation is a manifestation of that, then naturally it is very near to us. It's more near to us than the nearness is self. That is the small self, the little self with which we identify ourselves. It is more near than us to us. But in spite of this proximity, in spite of we being just a form of that one, we find that it is not so easily seen. In spite of it being the utter truth of what we are, that is the actual truth, the underlying truth, the lasting truth of what we are, in spite of all this, we do not see it. Why? Hidden by its own works, it seemed far off. Because it is hidden by its own works. So the manifestation is the work of the divine, and that work itself hides it. And therefore, to the work, it seems very far off and remote. Not only far off and remote, it appears impenetrable, occult, voiceless, obscure. And what is the result of this hiding? What is the result of its being concealed like this? The presence was lost by which all things have charm. If one sees the divine in everything, it has a charm. But because we do not see it, because it is hidden, the charm is gone. The presence was lost by which all things have charm. So it is that presence which lends charm to everything, and once we do not see that presence, the charm is gone. The glory lacked, of which they are dim signs. So all manifestation is only a dim sign of the glory of the divine. But then when that glory is hidden, the glory itself is missing. The glory lacked, of which they are dim signs. But however, the world still lives on. The world lived on, made empty of its cause with a capital C. So the cause, that is the real cause, the divine of this world, as if the world has been emptied of it. Of course, it cannot disappear, but because it is so effectively hidden, we feel as if it is not there in this world. And therefore, the world somehow lives on, but there's no charm, there's no glory in the creation. And the simile given is like love when the beloved's face is gone. So, to the lover, if the beloved is gone, he can't see her face anymore, then for some time he keeps remembering her, and then the face becomes a memory and then starts fading out of memory. He never forgets the love, but still the love loses all its intensity. It's a highly impoverished form of love that continues if he cannot see the face of the beloved for very long. So when the face of the beloved is not there, then it's a very impoverished form of love that continues, and in the same way, it is an impoverished form of life that continues in the world, because the real cause behind it, the real source of all the charm and glory that the world has, that is so effectively hidden. And that is what creates the urge in the seeker to seek it, to pursue it, to be able to recover that charm, to be able to recover that glory. So here comes in these lines, we find the motive behind this aspiration, why there is such a strong aspiration in the human being to go behind the appearances to discover that which is the cause behind all the appearances. Now, after the giving in these beautiful lines the motive for this pursuit, the motive for this aspiration, come some passages which are on the experience itself, and these have a mantric quality, and therefore they are very good passages also to meditate upon. And the first of these gives relatively early experiences of a seeker when the experience of the divine has not yet become constant. It comes only in some fleeting glimpses. So that is the experience in these lines, which are also on the very first page of this canto. A being intimate and unnameable, a wide compelling ecstasy and peace, felt in himself and all, and yet ungrasped, approached and faded from his soul's pursuit, as if forever luring him beyond. So the experience is that of a being intimate and unnameable. It is intimate, it's very close to him, close to the person who is seeking him. A wide compelling ecstasy and peace felt in himself and all, and yet ungrasped. And in this being, because of experiencing this being, because of getting some feel of this being, the seeker feels an ecstasy and peace. A wide compelling ecstasy and peace felt in himself, not only in himself, in everything else and all. So he can see this unnameable intimate being lending this peace and ecstasy to himself and everything around him, and yet he finds that this intimate and unnameable being is not yet within his grasp, and yet ungrasped. So what a beautiful description. A being intimate and unnameable, a wide compelling ecstasy and peace felt in himself and all, and yet ungrasped. And why does he feel it's ungrasped? Because it comes and goes, approached and faded from his soul's pursuit, as if forever luring him beyond. So it comes near him, approaches him, and then fades away. Fades away from his soul's pursuit, as if forever luring him beyond. So sort of playing a game with him, teasing him with those brief glimpses, and then it again retreats. And that is why comes this next line on which from which I picked up the title for this session. Now comes that line, near it retreated, far it called him still. And then the experience goes on. Nothing could satisfy but its delight. Its absence left the greatest actions dull. Its presence made the smallest seem divine. Now once he has experienced it, now he knows that nothing else can really satisfy him. Nothing could satisfy but its delight. Its here refers to the delight of the divine. Its absence left the greatest actions dull. The greatest things he did, which could have otherwise in the worldly sense brought him great satisfaction, in the absence of the divine they all appear very dull. On the other hand, its presence, when he feels the presence of the divine, even the smallest of actions, they become divine, they acquire the character of the divine, they acquire that ecstasy of the divine, the charm of the divine. So here the divine has been used as an adjective, so small d, not with a capital D. Its presence made the smallest seem divine. Smallest action is understood because it comes in the previous line. So its absence left the greatest actions dull, its presence made the smallest seem divine. Smallest of actions seem divine means seem divine in their character. Okay, it's used as an adjective here. So that is, these are the glimpses. And then the seeker goes on further. When it was there, the heart's abyss was filled, but when the uplifting deity withdrew, experience lost its aim in the inane. So when it was there, when the divine was there, when that experience was there, the heart's abyss was filled. That big pit, that big vacuum in the heart was filled. You know, thinking of that bhajan, tum bin lage suna, mere ghat, aake ghat mein prem bharo. So it all seems empty. The heart seemed empty, but when it was there, that abyss was filled. But when the uplifting deity withdrew, existence lost its aim in the inane, in the very ordinary, insipid, routine, dullness. All existence was lost when that deity withdrew, because keeps coming close, keeps withdrawing, approach comes very near and then retreats. Something like the game of hide and seek. You see, the person who is seeking has been blinded by that thing around his, around his eyes, and since he can't see, those whom he is trying to find, they keep teasing him. They come very near him, they'll make a sound to tell him, oh, we are near you, so you can just touch us. And then when he actually touches them, they are gone. And he can't make out, with a swift movement, he can't make out which way they turned. So, that sort of a game the divine is playing, and the divine hides and the seeker keeps seeking. So, the order of the immemorial planes, the godlike fullness of the instruments were turned to props for an impermanent scene. So all the instruments that we have in this world, the senses, the limbs and so on, which seemed to have a godlike fullness, if we see the divine in them, they are miracles. I mean, being able to see, to being able to hear, being able to even move the limb this much is itself a miracle. So all these God instruments with God-like fullness, if they do not see the divine in them, what do they become? They turn into props for an impermanent scene. They just become sort of something supporting, providing some sort of a scaffolding or a prop to something which is only impermanent, short-lasting. It's there now, it will be gone. But who that mightiness was, he knew not yet. So he had some glimpses, but he still did not know what that mightiness was. So still seems unknowable. And of course the fact is that while the unknowable is not entirely unknowable, the Rishi can see it, but as the mother has said, that even the Rishi is perhaps not able to see all of it. Because what the Rishi can see may be one aspect of it, and therefore different Rishis may see different aspects of the same. So even the Rishis, the experiences of different Rishis may not be identical, which means they're all experiencing only some facet of the divine. So in that sense, it may not be entirely unknowable, but it's also not entirely knowable. That's also true. So this experience of these glimpses goes on. Impalpable, yet filling all that is, it made and blotted out 1,000,000 worlds and took and lost 1,000 shapes and names. Impalpable, it can't be felt, and yet it fills all that is. It pervades everything that exists. It made and blotted out 1,000,000 worlds. It can create, it can destroy, blot out. It's destruction. Creation, destruction, all that it's doing with great facility, and while creating, it's taking on and losing in the process of destruction 1,000 shapes and names. Impalpable, yet filling all that is, it made and blotted out 1,000,000 worlds and took and lost 1,000 shapes and names. So that's a description of the divine as experienced by the seeker at stages when he is still experiencing only glimpses of the divine. The experience has not yet become constant. Then a little later come those lines where the seeker has a definitive experience, where he finds a greater certainty, a greater surety of what he is experiencing. Because when he's seeing only glimpses, then, as one of the lines here says, that he's not very sure. A giant doubt overshadowed his advance. So every time the divine advanced to him, he also had a giant doubt. Because, all this experience of the divine, these fleeting glimpses, are so contrary to ordinary experience, so seemingly impossible to ordinary experience, that he starts having doubts whether I'm seeing something real or I'm just imagining. So a giant doubt overshadowed his advance. But when the experience is definitive, then at least that sort of a doubt is not there. And now we'll come to one of those definitive experiences, which starts with line number 59 of this canto. Then to the ascent there came a mighty term, a height was reached where nothing made could live. A line where every hope and search must cease, neared some intolerant bare reality, a zero formed pregnant with boundless change. Now what is this experience like? To the ascent, that the ascent of consciousness, there came a mighty term. It reached a definitive mighty stage. A height was reached where nothing made could live. He reached that height where nothing that had been created, nothing that had been made could live. It had no place. Everything seemed a total illusion, as if it does not exist. This height had no place for things which had been created. It had room only for the uncreated. And who is the uncreated? The divine. It had room for that. It had no room for anything created, even by the divine. A line where every hope and search must cease. So he felt that this is the height, this is the line, the finishing line, where every hope and search must cease. Every hope of finding the divine and search for the divine must cease, because now have reached that reality. Neared some intolerant bare reality. So he felt, yes, this is reality with a capital R, but it is a intolerant bare reality. Intolerant to anything which is temporary and has been made. It does not have any room for any such thing. All those things do not exist anymore. A zero, and therefore it's a zero. But it's a zero which is behind everything, which is everlasting, which has always been there and will always be there. So it's a zero because it has no place for anything created, so nothing exists. It doesn't tolerate anything created and exists. So in that sense it is a zero. But it's a zero formed, pregnant with boundless change. But it is full of possibilities. Pregnant, pregnancy indicates a possibility. A zero formed, pregnant with boundless change. So it has the possibilities of boundless change. So this is the experience, and it goes on a dizzy verge where all disguises fail and human mind must abdicate in light or die like a moth in the naked blaze of truth. He stood compelled to a tremendous choice. So this experience of the reality being some sort of a nothing continues on a dizzy verge where all disguises fail. So he was at that verge, that point, that height where all disguises. So he felt all the creation as we see it is a sort of a disguise, because we don't see the reality. So it's a sort of a disguise, an illusion, where all disguises fail and human mind must abdicate in light or die like a moth in the naked blaze of truth. So the human mind, to which all these disguises appear real, must abdicate, means should give up its high position which human beings give it. Abdication is like giving up a throne, giving up a high pedestal. So the human mind must give up that in favor of what? In favor of the light. Light with a capital L, the light of the divine. In light of this experience of reality being intolerant of all these forms, in favor of that, the human mind, which finds all around everything very real, should give up. If it will not, what will happen? What is the other choice that the mind has? Or die like a moth in the naked blaze of truth. So if it will not give up on its own, it will die anyway. The way a moth does when it comes close to a bright light. So either the mind should voluntarily give up this high pedestal, or else it will be compelled to die, compelled to sacrifice itself to this bright light, which it will not be able to stand. It will be attracted to it, but it will not be able to tolerate it. It will be burnt by this bright light. So these are the two choices, which means the human mind has no place in this experience, and therefore he stood compelled to a tremendous choice. He, the seeker, stood to a tremendous choice. What is the choice he had to make? All he had been and all towards which he grew must now be left behind, or else transform into a self of that which has no name. So what is the choice? The choice, therefore, for the seeker who has realized in this divine, in this reality, which is a sort of a nothingness, a sort of a pregnant zero, the choice that he has is that all that he had been and all towards which he grew must now be left behind. So one choice is that everything which he had considered real so far, but had now left behind while experiencing this new reality, which was a pregnant zero, which had no place for all these created things. One choice is that he should give it up, leave it behind him, as if it was some sort of an illusion, and now that he has transcended that illusion, now he should leave it behind as something which has no room for him, which has no meaning for him, and he should just forget it. So this is one choice. What is the other choice? Or else transform into a self of that with a capital T. Or else transform into a self of that which has no name. Or else transform all that he has learned to see in this world and consider it real. Transform it into what? Into a form of that with a capital T, that ultimate real, that highest reality, which has no name. So all these named objects should be transformed into a version of that, transformed into that which has no name, which is the divine. So either transform it or forget it. You know what choice Sri Aurobindo will make. Sri Aurobindo makes the choice of transformation, not the choice of rejection. One is a rejection. Rejection of all this as unreal, and now it is behind me, I don't see it anymore. The other is transforming it. So that is the choice he is left with. But Sri Aurobindo does not go much into this choice in this canto. In this canto, he continues to talk in terms of this all-negating experience. But all the same, you can see the ecstasy which it generates, even this description of the divine. Because this is no ordinary experience. It comes from an extremely high level of consciousness. It is not that type of a fleeting glimpses which were there in the earlier. This is a very definitive spiritual experience. And therefore, now without explaining, I'll just try to read it, and you just share with me the delight of this passage. Then to the ascent there came a mighty term, height was reached where nothing made could live. A line where every hope and search must cease, neared some intolerant bare reality. A zero formed pregnant with boundless change, on a dizzy verge where all disguises fail, and human mind must abdicate in light or die like a moth in the naked blaze of truth. He stood compelled to a tremendous choice. All he had been and all towards which he grew must now be left behind, or else transform into a self of that which has no name. Now we come to yet another experience of nothingness on this page 307, and that starts with line 87 of this canto. All glory of outline, sweetness of harmony, rejected like a grace of trivial notes, expunged from being's silence, nude, austere, died into a fine and blissful nothingness. Just a few lines, but very powerful lines. All glory of outline, all the glory that mind attributes to mere outlines, sweetness of harmony, all the sweetness of harmony in the world, rejected like a grace of trivial notes. All this was rejected as something which had a grace, but all the same trivial. Expunged from being's silence. They were expunged, thrown out from the being's silence. The new identification with the new being The becoming had identified itself with the being. Becoming, is an event, it's a temporary thing. That had now identified itself with the being with a capital B. From there, all these outlines and all this sweetness of harmony, etc., all those sweet, even they were expunged. And what was left was silence, nude and austere. No frills, no disguise, all nude, all austere, without any frills, without outlines, without coverings. And all these died into a fine, all these things which the person had considered real earlier, died into a fine and blissful nothingness. So the ultimate reality he identified with a sort of a nothingness. All glory of outline, sweetness of harmony, rejected like a grace of trivial notes, expunged from being silence, nude, austere, died into a fine and blissful nothingness. Then comes yet another description of the divine on the same, starts with line 94. The universe removed its colored veil, and at the unimaginable end of the huge riddle of created things appeared the far-seen Godhead of the whole, his feet firm based on life's stupendous wings, omnipotent, a lonely seer of time, inward, inscrutable, with diamond gaze. A sort of a very pure description of the divine, whichever way you see it, as a nothingness or as everything. It can fit both. The universe removed its colored veil, the colored, attractive veil that the universe has, appearance being different from the underlying reality, that was all removed. And at the unimaginable end of the huge riddle of created things, this created things are like a riddle, a huge riddle. A riddle, not just a riddle, but a huge riddle, a tremendous riddle. Just imagine this entire material universe, this planet, so many other planets, and all the galaxies and everything. So, a huge riddle of created things. One cannot imagine that it will also have an end. That end is beyond even our imagination. But the seer, the rishi, the mystic had reached that end because all this colored veil, colorful veil which this creation has, had been removed. The universe removed its colored veil, and at the unimaginable end of the huge riddle of created things appeared the far-seen Godhead of the whole. His feet firm based on life's stupendous wings. So his feet, the formless, has been given in the seer's imagination feet, based on life's stupendous wings. Omnipotent, a lonely seer of time. Inward, inscrutable, with diamond gaze. So without a form, looking at everything with a diamond gaze. Omnipotent and standing on life's stupendous wings means wings, are symbolic of the flight. So here the mystic is imagining that flight from the world into that reality where the Godhead is alone, unnameable, and is just presenting the appearance of an all-supporting void, a vacant vast. Nothing outside, all within. Inward, inscrutable, with a diamond gaze. So as a result of this new type of an experience, the mystic's mind turns 180 degrees. The consciousness is sort of reversed. What he had considered real so far becomes unreal to him, and what he had considered something beyond imagination which could not exist becomes real to him. That comes on page 308, starting with line 114. Only a formless form of self was left, a tenuous ghost of something that had been, the last experience of a lapsing wave before it sinks into a boundless sea, as if kept even on the brink of not its bare feeling of the ocean whence it came. A vastness brooded free from sense of space, an everlastingness cut off from time, a strange, sublime, inalterable peace, silent, rejected from it, world and soul. Let's go over it slowly. How the mind turns 180 degrees. Only a formless form of the self was left. So now what the mystic, the Rishi, is left with is a formless form. Seems a contradiction in terms, but the form with a capital F is the divine, which actually is formless. So to the seer, it has a form in his imagination, but actually it has no form. Only a formless form of self was left, self with a capital S. So self with a capital S is what we normally identify ourselves and the world with. So out of that, what was left was only a formless form, which means that all that was wiped out. So this is the reversal of consciousness, which actually you can see within one line. Only a formless form of self was left, a tenuous ghost of something that had been. So what had been real to him was now left behind only in the form of a tenuous and intangible ghost. The last experience of a lapsing wave before it sinks into a boundless sea. So this vanishing of all what he has considered real, he has compared here to a lapsing wave, a wave which was a part of the ocean, but then it is soon about to leave forget its identity, merge its identity with the ocean. So it's in that last phase when it is still a wave, but the next moment it will no longer be a wave, it will be a part of the sea. The last experience of a lapsing wave, so is considered his mind, his original human consciousness, the mental consciousness, to that wave which is about to now lose its identity. The last experience of a lapsing wave before it sinks into a boundless sea. Boundless sea, a sea without any limits, without any destination. That's what boundless means. Without limits, without boundaries, without a destination. That is what the sea looks like. It just goes. You can see the sea as far away as you can see, and you can't see where it will end, this way or that way, the here and there. So it seems to have no clear destination. So that is the type of merger which the Rishi has experienced of his mind and everything that the mind had identified with earlier. As if it kept even on the brink of naught its bare feeling of the ocean whence it came. So as if this wave has a certain type of persistence about it, even on the brink of being wiped out, it has a sort of a bare feeling of the ocean, and at the same time it is just sort of about to give up, but that a bit persists. It's a type of a bare feeling. A vastness brooded free from sense of space, and everlastingness cut off from time. Now here it is the new consciousness which has been reached. A vastness brooded free from sense of space, unlimited by space, beyond all space. And everlastingness cut off from time, no sense of time. Always there, has always been there, will always be there. Exists everywhere that we can imagine, everywhere that we cannot imagine. So a vastness brooded free from sense of space, and everlastingness cut off from time, a strange, sublime, inalterable peace, silent, rejected from it, world and soul. A strange, sublime, inalterable peace, silent. Now this is these two lines have to be read a little carefully. There's no comma or anything between these two lines. So in a way continuous. A strange, sublime, inalterable peace, silent, rejected from it, world and soul. So what was the result of this reversal of consciousness? Everything that he identified as real has been wiped out and has been replaced by this vastness, which is completely independent of all time and space. What is the result? A strange, sublime, inalterable peace, silent. So the result is a strange, because it is still a new experience, sublime, of a very high and subtle order, inalterable, now it cannot be shaken. It's a stable, constant experience of what? Peace, silent. Now peace is in one line, silent is in the next, but they have to be read together, there's no comma. And what does this peace, silent mean? It means silent peace. In some languages, the adjective comes before the noun, in some it comes after the noun. In English we say silent peace. So the adjective silent comes before the peace. In French it would be just the opposite. In French, peace would come first and silent later. So this is the French style, poetics. And the poets can easily, a poet can easily alter it and give it that form. So that is what Sri Aurobindo has done here. A strange, sublime, inalterable peace, silent. So this experience was that of a strange, sublime, inalterable, silent peace, in plain English. But in poetic language, a strange, sublime, inalterable peace sublime. And what did this experience manage to do? That comes in the next few words in the second line here. Rejected from it world and soul. This experience was so overwhelming that it rejected as unreal world and soul. World, if may be considered all the material universe, and soul, that is the individual spark of the divine. The spark of the divine in the individual is what we call the soul. Even that was wiped out because the individuals didn't exist for him anymore. If the individuals don't exist, the souls don't exist. Everything has merged into that vacant vast. A strange, sublime, inalterable, peace silent, rejected from it, world and soul. So this is the result of that new consciousness. And then come a few more mantric utterances towards the end of this canto. I'll read out some of them. It had no kinship with the universe. It, that ultimate reality, seemed to have no kinship, no real bond with the universe. There was no act, no movement in its vast. Life's question met by its silence died on her lips. The world's effort ceased, convicted of ignorance, finding no sanction of supernal light. So everything, all the questions, everything that we deal with, everything was wiped out. There was no mind there. Once the mind is not there, all the products of the mind don't exist. There was no mind there with its need to know. There was no heart there with its need to love. So both aspects of the mind, knowing and feeling, both are gone. All person perished in its namelessness. The person as a whole perished. The person as an individual didn't exist. There was no second. It had no partner or peer. So it was just one, that one vacant vast. It had no second. Nothing else existed. It had no partner or peer. Only itself was real to itself. And a little later, a being formless, featureless and mute, that knew itself by its own timeless self, aware forever in its motionless depths, uncreating, uncreated and unborn. Three very important and very pregnant adjectives for the divine: uncreating, uncreated and unborn. The one by whom all live, who lives by none. An immeasurable luminous secrecy guarded by the veils of the unmanifest. Above the changing cosmic interlude, a silent cause occult, impenetrable, infinite, eternal, unthinkable, alone. So many attributes of the divine within these few lines. A being formless, featureless and mute, without form, without features, without any sound, mute. That knew itself by its own timeless self. No time, and yet it knew itself. It was a self-aware entity, aware forever in its motionless depths, uncreating, uncreated and unborn. The one by whom all live. All that is lives because of that one who lives by none. He is not dependent upon anything for its existence. It exists because it is the only existence. An immeasurable luminous secrecy guarded by the veils of the unmanifest. Above the changing cosmic interlude, abode supreme, immutable, the same. A silent cause, cause with a capital C. A silent cause occult, a hidden cause behind everything, impenetrable, infinite, eternal, unthinkable, alone. So with these mantric utterances, I stop here. Became a little much longer than I had imagined or planned. But, yes, that's a good question. The feeling that one gets from this canto is predominantly that of the ultimate reality being a nothingness, and the experience that it corresponds to is the experience of nirvana, which we typically associate with the experience of experience which is attributed to Buddha, the shunya, the nothingness as being the ultimate reality. I mean, one has to look at this canto in its proper context and not in isolation. Because this is only an introduction to the next few cantos, in which Sri Aurobindo is looking at the world as something very real, a manifestation of the divine, although highly imperfect manifestation of the divine, and pleads with the Divine Mother for taking it nearer perfection. So this imperfect manifestation in this world should be taken nearer perfection, which means that he does not reject this world, but seeks transformation, to which he also hints at in this canto. But he does not dwell much on that transformation. He just leaves it at that when a person has, when a rishi has that type of an experience, he has the choice of either considering everything else as unreal and rejecting it, or of transforming the manifestation or the forms which the divine has assumed. So that choice is there. And Sri Aurobindo makes the second choice, but that comes in the subsequent cantos. In this one, he continues to predominantly dilate on this experience of the divine as a nothingness, and this can be actually a real experience and an experience which can be a stage to another type of realization. And the Upanishads have also talked about it in both these terms, neti neti and iti iti, which means that it is not this, not this, not this, which means that in this tree, this animal, this human being, no, the divine is not that. The divine is much more than that. Therefore, the tree is not divine, the animal is not divine, man is not divine. So the divine is much more than that, and therefore none of these can be equated with the divine. But also iti iti, because these are all other forms of the divine, so the plant is also divine, the animal is also divine, man is also divine, and so on. So both these put together give us a complete picture. And if you look at it, although the Buddha, is said that his experience was of the type which, in which nothingness was considered the ultimate reality, Buddha himself did not reject the world. He came back to the world to create a better world. He didn't stay there. He was not satisfied with his own realization of that nirvana. He came back and gave the world what the world needed in the form of the Eightfold Path and the Panchashila and the 5 precepts and so on. In a simplified way, he tried to improve the world. That is what he came and did. And Sri Aurobindo also, when you go to the subsequent ones, is talking about the transformation which he is trying to seek through the Divine Mother, and a type of transformation which is unprecedented. Not the type of transformation by giving a few moral precepts to human beings, but by going to the very roots. The root is the level of consciousness. So by going to the very roots, he is trying to plead for that force to be brought down on earth, which will be able to elevate the human consciousness so that human nature would change, and that is what would change the world.